The night shift is famed for things that go bump in the night, and not always can be something that's rationally explained away. It's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Number 1. I work as a transporter in a hospital. About 2 years ago, we moved from the old city hospital into a new state-of-the-art facility. The old hospital was built in the 1930s and was showing its age, and at night was just plain creepy. Each floor had an east and west wing. The east wing of the 4th floor was the first wing to be shut down about 2 weeks before the move. One night at around 9:30, I'm up on the floor to get to a patient from the west wing. I see a small group of nurses and aides who all used to work in the now closed east wing. They look visibly shaken. I walk over to see everything's okay, and they had told me that they had decided to walk through their old wing for nostalgia's sake. When they were over there, the phone at the nurse's station started ringing. The computers and phones had not yet been moved. Not sure what to do, one of the nurses reached over to the counter and answered the phone. The nurse told me that there was a woman's voice on the other end that sounded confused. This was the conversation, as best as I can remember it. "Hello, how can I help you?" asked the nurse. "Hello, who is this?" "This is Janet. I'm a nurse. Is there anything I can do to help you?" Suddenly a voice came on the other line. "Where am I?" "This is Faversham Hospital. Are you a patient here?" "Oh, okay." Then the line went dead. That was when the nurse finally looked at the screen of the phone to see where the call was coming from. The phone gave the room number directly next to the nurse's station. The rooms, by this point, had all been cleared out and had the phones removed. They could see directly into the room and see that there was no one there. That's when they bolted towards the west wing when I was getting off the elevator. I avoided that wing for the rest of my time there. My mother started working at a hospital right out of college. It was the only job she had ever known. On moving day, she was determined to walk through every hallway before leaving for the last time. She had a camera and was taking pictures as she went. On one of the empty patient wings, she stopped and was getting ready to take a picture when the doors to the room right next to her slammed shut, as though someone on the other side had thrown the doors as hard as they could. My mother decided that she was done taking pictures. This last one happened to me just recently. It was going on 10, and I was taking my last patient back to her room. She was a little old lady who was stable enough to ride in a wheelchair but definitely needed assistance on her feet. I got her back in her room and helped her into bed. I made sure she was comfortable and set the bed alarm before turning out the lights and leaving her room. I pulled the curtain behind me so as not to let too much light in, but not all the way, so that I could still see her in bed from the hallway. Her nurse was in her room next door, and I needed to speak with her. Whilst I was standing there waiting for the nurse to come out of the room, I distinctly saw a person walk past the curtain inside the old woman's room. The person was around the same height as the woman, had the same grey hair, and at first I thought, she shouldn't be up walking around. Then I remembered the bed alarm was set. The room was totally silent when I looked in, and I could still see her lying exactly where I'd left her. She had not moved an inch, and the bed alarm was still armed. That's when I got the most intense full-body chills of my life. The nurse came over out of the other room. I gave her my message, and then booked it out of there. Number 2. I used to work as a corrections officer. I have plenty of real creepy stuff that happened to me over those 5 years, but by far this was the creepiest incident. I was assigned to the single man cells wing of the jail, which is basically solitary confinement for inmates who are being punished for breaking rules in jail. So around 5 AM, medical calls for all inmates that need medication to be escorted from my wing to medical to receive their meds. I pull out 2 guys, restrain them, and instruct them to face the wall and await the guard who will be escorting them. As the 3 of us are there, I begin to hear a woman crying. I was new to that jail and didn't think anything of it. As I'm just listening to this woman cry, I slowly start to realize a few things. There are no females in this wing, nor any wing where men are. The female wing is down the hall, sealed tight, with about 3 doors in between, and a hall and the actual wing. There is only about 2 other males in the wing who are asleep aside from the 3 of us. I look up at the inmates and notice that they have a kind of smile on their face as they're watching me realize what was going on. So I ask them, "Do you guys hear that?" One of the inmates responds, "Almost every night, boss." They went on about other things that would happen in the wing. Water turning on and off, towels being thrown down the floor, hearing knocks on the walls. I actually had another incident that night, confronting the knocks heard on the walls in the empty cells. The same night, or morning rather, when we were assigned to a certain wing, we had to do exit door checks, which was basically going to the exit door of the wing and checking the fire exit door to make sure it was still secured, and then radioing into the control every few hours. I was making my way down a very long hall with an empty single-man cells to my left and right, and I could hear knocking at the end of the hall, but it wasn't coming from the exit door. It was coming from one of the cells on the right-hand side. As I would gradually move closer, I could hear the sound getting louder as I approached. When I got to the end of the hall, the knocking seemed to have gone away. So I grabbed the exit door to make sure it was secure, and a very distinct and loud knock came from the cell on the right-hand side of me. I'd seen enough horror films not to look into that empty cell, and decided it would be best to just get out. Number 3. This happened many years ago when I was 18. I was on one of my first jobs. They really don't pay very much, and it was part-time, but it was perfect for a student. The job was in an old cinema that was on the verge of being demolished. They hired us to prevent theft at night, as it was in a conflict zone. My work consisted of watching some monitors and make a round every hour. Easy stuff like that. You had to go through the area, do a few checkpoints, and the cinema was old from the early 70s. The basement was nothing special, but it wasn't nice. Dimly lit and quite long, and it was about 50 to 80 meters long, with a width of about 2 people on average. There were doors on the left side every 5 meters. In this zone, we had to make sure that every door was locked, and continue to the next door until the very end. Well, I was there checking one by one. It's a very automated process. At the end, when I checked every single door, it was clear that everything was fine. I started to take the stairs to return with my partner. The moment I made my first step, I heard the clear sound of a door start to open. So quickly I turned to see it was one of the first doors that opens very slowly. My first thought is that somebody was inside and had pretended that the door was locked. At the time, I didn't think about something paranormal happening. Quickly, I pulled the club and was speaking to my partner with the walkie-talkie so that he could come and support me. I started walking in the direction of the door, as silently as possible, trying to hear anything from the inside of that room. When suddenly, the light inside the room turns on. Now I'm sure there's someone inside. My partner comes running down, and without asking me questions, we both see that the room is lit up, and that's where the people are. We're getting together carefully to go into the room, and when we go in, there's no one inside. We searched every crevice of that room. It was full of stuff. We looked behind spare parts, everything. But there was no one. There was nothing. And the room wasn't even very big. We looked at each other, not even understanding what the hell happened there, in this concrete box of a room. But we looked at each other and got the hell out of there. Number 4. I work in the middle of the Navajo Nation at a power plant. Naturally, it's kind of creepy driving to work at midnight. So, here's some of the stuff I've seen. It was raining. I was driving down the highway after leaving a gas station, jamming to some Ashley by Escape the Fate. My Spotify playlist is a very confusing place. I see headlights ahead of me. Me being me, I slam it, going about 75, when suddenly the headlights veer off into the desert. But they weren't headlights. They were two orbs, emitting only light off themselves, and not where they were heading. They shot into the desert, and I drove the rest of the way to work with my jaw dropped. Number 5. I used to work for a very major company. I needed a job at the time, and they hired me for basic security. I meant that as the actual term. There were levels of security guard here, and I was just basic. I was basically the walking security camera that called the more proficient security guards if I saw shit. I worked from 9:30 PM to 7:45 AM. At various points, I'm sitting in a booth. At the other points, I'm walking around. The weekend before Thanksgiving, I remember being on shift and having the night that I quit and found a new job because of the following. So I'm patrolling around the perimeter at one of the main buildings. There's night shift workers inside the plant as it operates 24/7. I hear them working away as usual. My walkie goes off though, and someone other than my main shift boss tells me to go check out behind the auxiliary building. Now, I only divert usually when my shift boss tells me to. I didn't recognize this voice, so I call back asking for them to ask what's up. My actual shift boss replies this time, asking me what I'm talking about. So I tell him that someone said to check out the auxiliary building. He told me that no one had said that, and to stay in my patrol area. I think I'm being bamboozled, but I stay and keep patrolling. About an hour later, the same message comes back, and someone tells me that I need to go check out the field behind the auxiliary building. I make the same call back to my boss, and he says the same thing. Apparently I'm the only one hearing it. Eventually, shifts change. My boss leaves 2 hours before I do, and there's this 40-minute gap between shift bosses sometimes, if for whatever reason they like to take a while switching. During the gap, the voice comes back on my channel, telling me to go to the auxiliary building again. The auxiliary building is empty at night. It's away from the main plant and faces the woods surrounding the land. I ignore it, but wait for my shift manager. I call a few other guards though, and ask if anyone has seen anything near the auxiliary building, and tell them what I've been hearing. They all deny hearing anything, and one agrees to go look, since they're nearby, a lot closer than I am. Eventually he says nothing is up near the building, and all clear. I finish my shift and start driving away from the plant. I pass the auxiliary building on my way out, just out of curiosity to glance over. There are like 15 people standing next to the tree line of the woods behind the auxiliary building, all wearing red from head to toe. I was contracted, and at will I told my boss I couldn't continue. I was too spooked. Turns out the same guard who checked for me quit shortly after that. Number 6. My first line of work was in thrift shops. This was a vague village in the edge of the industrial zone in a seedy part of the city. It was in the middle of a Canadian January, sitting at -40 degrees C with the wind chill. I was closing with 4 other cashiers and a manager. It's 20 minutes after 11 PM, and everyone is at the front door waiting for the manager to set the alarm so that we can leave. My manager punches something in, the door buzzes, and we start leaving. We're almost all out the door, and suddenly I hear this really high-pitched electronic wail. The alarm's gone off. The manager starts panicking a bit. The store-level management isn't known for their understanding, and she says, "Right, one of you needs to stay with me whilst I call the security company and management." So I volunteered. We get back inside, and I get told to check the back door latch to make sure that they're locked and latched. If they weren't, then the alarm would stay on. I jog to the back, get 10 meters to the door, and I hear this loud pop, and the latch pops off. Part of the door frame chips away, and the door swings wide. This 7-foot guy with a rug for a face stumbles through the snow, carrying a crowbar, taking 2 steps in, and looks up at me staring at him. I make the universal "what the hell" head shake, and I think he kind of went, "Oh," did a quick 180 and stumbled back outside. I found out after that my manager entered the wrong code into the alarm too many times, and that's what set it off. I guess the homeless guy was planning on waiting a bit longer before raiding the place, heard the alarm go off, and he eventually decided it was either now or never and barged in. Wasn't exactly how I envisioned confronting an intruder. Number 7. I work the audit shift at my hotel, which is between 11 PM to 7 AM. One night during the winter, I got a call from a room about screaming from the floor below them. Our hotel is only 6 stories high, and they were on the 5th floor, so that means that the room they were complaining about was on the 4th floor, because it was set up as ground floor, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. I told them I would check it out for them, as I was kind of reluctant because, as an audit, I'm the only worker in the whole building at night. Before I went up though, I looked into the system to see if there were any rooms near them, so that I could narrow down where the noise was coming from. And here's the creepy part for me. It was in the winter, so there weren't many people in the building. In fact, there weren't any rooms near the ones on the 5th floor, and there wasn't a single guest staying on the 4th. I went up and investigated, and the room directly underneath the guest's door was wide open, which should be impossible, being as it uses a keycard system. Thinking it was just left open by housekeeping, I looked in to see if anyone was in there, and closed the door. I told the guest from the 5th floor that it must have been some kids running down the hall. An hour later, they said they heard screaming again and banging below them. I went up there, and the door was open again. At this point, it was a security concern because someone has access to the room that shouldn't. So I decided to watch the security footage from the 4th floor in the video. The door clearly opens by itself. It's the freakiest thing I have ever seen. I wrote a ticket to maintenance to check the door in the morning, and they told me it was fine. I showed the video to my boss and he freaked out too. We ended up moving the guests to the other side of the building because they were too spooked. To add to this, when maintenance went in there to check the door before they opened it, they heard banging in the room. When they came in, the screen door to the balcony was wide open. I don't really believe in paranormal stuff, but no one could explain what happened, and from then on, I've been really hesitant at night to go up to the 4th floor on my rounds. My manager ended up filing an incident report, just to have it on our records. Number 8. This was the event of the Happy Land Social Club fire. I was helping move bodies out of the fire and subsequent investigation. The coroner's office was strapped, to say the least. I was a New York City paramedic and got pushed into service. The city had to borrow vans to remove the bodies in various areas for holding. Our borrowed van gave up after one of several trips, so we had to sit with 4 bodies bagged in the back of a van for another van to come empty us, so the wrecker could take the van away. Another old Ford van backs up onto ours, and we begin the slow process of lifting the bags up by the corners and handing your handholds to the guy in the other van so they could gingerly slide the body over. Mind you, this was a street in the Bronx. As I lift one of the bags, I hear a whistle in the bag. I opened the bag, violating the seal, just to make sure it wasn't a mistake and this person ended up in a bag. When airways meet superheated gas, the edema closes them, and as we moved this body, the air was released from the chest through a space in a shiny gold tooth. Hence, the body whistled at me. Grills still make my skin crawl to this day. Number 9. I work in an office and used to work an overnight shift from 12 AM to 8 AM. On my lunch breaks, I would often take a nap. I work on the 14th floor, but that late at night, there's still a few people around, so I would go to the vacant 2nd floor to catch a few winks. It was completely silent down there, with the exception of the occasional street noise outside. Also, they turned the heating off during the winter, so it would be cold. I would use my coat as a blanket, perfect for napping. The lights down there were motion sensor, and would turn on by themselves as you walked down the hallway. There was a long hallway that went around the building that was used as a waiting area for conference rooms. This waiting area had comfortable chairs that made a perfect little bed if you pushed 2 together. I had a perfect spot behind a pillar. The only bad part about my spot were the lights. They were wired backwards, meaning they would always be on until you walked into the area and they turned off. I would just cover my eyes, but the time the timer turned the lights back on, I was usually out anyway. So this night at around 3:30 AM, I pushed my chair together and went to sleep. Almost instantly something weird happened. I heard footsteps approaching the corner to the hall that I was sleeping in. Along with footsteps, I heard keys jingling. I assumed it was the janitor and laid still to allow him to pass. He would look at me and see my employee badge, and I wouldn't have any problems. I hear the footsteps get closer and the keys get louder. Any minute now he would see me and stop, or keep walking. Either way, I would hear him pass and know when I could relax. The problem was, after he turned the corner, the footsteps and the keys continued but never got closer. It sounded as though he turned the corner and stopped and proceeded to march in place. I kept waiting for him to pass, but the sound stayed the same distance away. I didn't want to lift my head because, honestly, I shouldn't have been down there sleeping, and I didn't want to get in trouble. After a few minutes, I decided to see what the hell the guy was doing. Was he making noises to wake me up? Was he messing with me? I figured that none of my supervisors walk around with a key ring, so I probably wasn't in danger of getting into trouble. I tried to lift my head, and I couldn't move. I struggled to roll over as I was sleeping on my side, and finally was able to force myself over onto my back. I couldn't move my arms or legs, or speak. or open my eyes beyond a small slit enough to see light. The lights turn off. The footsteps and keys, which hadn't stopped marching in place, began heading in my direction. I desperately tried to sit up and open my mouth or eyes, and I just couldn't. I felt a heavy weight on my chest. The keys were on top of me, and I could distinctly feel two large hands holding me down. It felt like someone had climbed on top of me and was holding me down with all those weights on my chest. I start to panic. I try to yell out and can't speak. I try to move my arms to get the key man off, and my arms won't move. I'm completely helpless. Worst of all, I can't open my eyes to see what was on top of me. This felt like it went on for an eternity, but I'd guess maybe actually a minute or so. Finally, the weight lifted, and my eyes opened part way, and there was nothing on top of me or even around me. The footsteps had gone back around the corner, and the keys jingled off in the distance. I lifted my head, and to my horror, my chairs were no longer where I had pushed them. I always pushed them behind that pillar so that people wouldn't see me, but now I was laying in the middle of the hall. The chairs pushed away from the pillar and the window. The lights were still off, indicating something had been moving recently. I started to hear a low droning sound in my ear, a low electric hum. I'm sweating like crazy. I grabbed my jacket to wipe my face. When I pulled the jacket away from my face, I was back in my original spot. The sound was the lights overhead blazing away in the silence. No footsteps, no keys. I grabbed my things and went back upstairs. I don't believe in ghosts or supernatural stuff like that, and I have experienced sleep paralysis before, as a side effect of medication. It must have been some nightmare mixed with some form of sleep paralysis, but Jesus Christ, it felt so real. It was horrifying. I later tell a co-worker about what happened, and he said a worker who helped build the building had killed himself here during construction, and some people have reported seeing a ghost of a construction worker in empty rooms walking the halls. We both laughed about it. A ghost, haha, yeah right. He said, "People are stupid, man. They said that they heard keys jingling and everything. Morons." Number 10. I work at a crisis nursery, which is a childcare facility that provides emergency and respite care for children under the age of 7. I used to work the graveyard shift all the time. I have to say first that I am absolutely a non-believer in paranormal stuff at all. That being said, when you and 2 or 3 other girls in their 20s are the only adults, the shit gets creepy. Now, the facility I work in was named for a child that was beaten to death by one of their parents. The nursery was started in their name as a way to hopefully prevent another child dying a violent death at the hands of a stressed out caregiver. So the story that goes around is that this kid's spirit haunts the nursery and is mostly active at night. I get told this on one of my first graveyard shifts, and I'm like, yeah, whatever, scare the newbie. That stuff doesn't really bother me. Well, later on that night, one of the kids gets up to use the bathroom. One of my co-workers was helping the kid back to bed and returned to where we were all sitting. Pretty soon, someone hears the water running in the bathroom. They go check it out. Yep, it's running. The co-worker swears up and down that it was off when she'd left. Kinda weird. But I honestly think they were just trying to scare me. Or they tell me that one of the reasons that they think the place is haunted is that many different people have reported different children asking about that kid. As in, why doesn't that kid have to go to bed? While they're pointing at nothing. I brush it off and basically forget all about it. A week later, I was in the sleeping room, which is the bedroom where all the kids sleep, and there always must be an adult in the room. I'm by myself, I'm just chilling reading a book with a book light. The rest of the room is pitch black and silent. All of a sudden, this kid of about 5 years old sits bolt upright in bed and says, "How come they aren't asleep? Why do they get to play? I want to play too," all while pointing at a wall with no other kids in the vicinity. Instant crazy shivers all over me. I was so scared I almost screamed. I refused to be alone in there from that moment on. Perhaps it was the kid just having a dream, but man, I almost peed myself. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. Night shift stories are some of my favourites. What do you guys think of them? Also, for any of those of you interested in Vikings or history in general, my brother has relaunched his channel. I'll be leaving a link at the end of the video or in the description if any of you guys want to check it out. I also have some great news. The Mortis Media merch store has now launched, with even more stuff than before. And yes, the Mortis Media logo is now on a selection of items. So get into the holiday spirit and check out some of the cool goodies in store today. And remember that if you enjoyed today's video, please consider dropping a like and leaving a comment. It's a really great way to help support the channel and I appreciate it tremendously. And if you'd like to do something incredible to help support the channel further, feel free to visit my Patreon. You can find a link in the description as well as the links to my social media. And if you want me to read your story on my channel, you can submit it as a text post to Reddit or send it to me via email. Both links can be found in the description. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.